Okay, welcome to the show. This is a pre-recorded session that we did earlier this afternoon. And so for those of you joining us at 7 p.m. Eastern time, welcome to the chat. I'm joined today by Avi Lago from I want to say Edinburgh. I keep thinking you're in Edinburgh. You're in Glasgow.
Yeah.
Welcome, Avi. So for those who are unfamiliar with Avi, Avi has been making quite a wave on the internet lately. I would say that's been quite a wave.
You're
With a
too kind.
blush.
I'm just like, no, that's just delighting actually.
So
I wouldn't say I've been making a wave. You're too kind. Thank you, Ben. So thanks.
oh, I try to flatter my guests. For those who don't know Avi, Avi is an amazing Ayurvedic practitioner, a Jyotisha, a practitioner of traditional Vedic astrology, and so many other things. I mean, you can see the books behind you. You are a very well studied individual. So I'm really I want you to introduce yourself. I don't think I can do a good job.
So, like anything, when we talk about introductions, the
Mhm.
biggest thing that we should always do is remember that we are connected to a community. So, this is the
Mhm.
thing about myself. I sometimes, when it comes to just connection, it's about reflection of my own self. So, like the way you just said, Edinburgh, no, I'm Glasgow, Scotland. Not, I think there's one in Australia, but the various paths that have actually been blended have been because of birth. So I actually grew up in a very multi-spiritual household. So on my mum's side, it would have been Buddhism and Christianity. My dad's side, Sikhism, but overall there was always an adherence to Hinduism. From that, what actually then was woven from a very early childhood was these elements of trying to understand and navigating, because I'm the fourth generation in Scotland actually. So my great grandparents came in 1923. So it's quite interesting that now fourth generation, and I'm looking forward to Ben your book. So when it comes to a lot of ancestral veneration and just our connection, as you know, such as this like actual subject, we're all connected. So introductions have always been something that, is it a layer,
Mhm.
or am I as an individual, or am I a collective? So when I look at it that way, my pagan journey actually started off like most of us at a very young age, usually about 11, 12.
Mhm.
And it sparked off because weaving this kind of cross cultural references, you can imagine East West, being Scottish and Indian. I call it the Sabrina complex, but I'd get to that later. You know, that kind of cross cultural identity, spirituality, sexuality, the way it overlaps. It created not an issue ever for me. I will be honest, I'm fortunate that my parents nurtured this. This was another thing, they always nurtured it. There was hence if you're wondering all this. Um, Family's a big thing. So family's always been a big unit, not just culturally, but as a connection.
Yes.
So when I explored my spirituality, I was actually brought up as a Theravadan Buddhist.
Mhm.
Grew up with a Buddhist monk. I'll explain slightly why. As you can imagine, my parents had a love marriage, not
Mhm.
an arranged. So you can already
Mm.
see we did not take my dad's like the way that it would be, that more patriarchal kind of vibe. You would usually think because we've taken our dad's surname, we would take our dad's belief, we would take everything.
Mm.
Mum gets then married into the family. It never happened like that in that manner. It was more organic.
Right.
So even from the start, my own belief systems were always, if you're going to practice this, question it. If you're wanting to explore it, feel free. But
Mm.
my granddad, my maternal granddad, always was very philosophical and very much someone that was involved with, if we're moved to a new country, then we should also understand why are we here,
Mm.
not enforce our beliefs in that. So I guess there is a pride,
Mm.
like when you move, the language, I do speak
Mhm.
multiple languages, as you know, like Punjabi and Hindi, but the spirituality kept coming back,
Mm.
but it was never ever enforced. So for example, like the evil eye,
Mm.
my great grandmother, my mum,
Mhm.
even all the men in the family, it was a big deal.
Yes.
If it was anything to do with food, we would know how to bless it. If it was
Absolutely.
anything to do with, so do you see, it was always there.
Mm.
But it was only then afterwards in my teen years that I started going out with my mum, we used to always have these moments. My mum was very much nurturing, and we used to always talk, and I got into a lot of trouble in school.
Okay.
Yes, as much as you may think I'm studious, I was always inquisitive, and with that kind of background, you can imagine what would have happened. I was in a very non-denominational school, so as you can imagine, in Glasgow, you got Catholic, Protestant, you got Hindu, Muslim. It's very, very secular, but it was very non-denominational. So my school was also that. So I used to, I can't deny the fact, ended up going to, like most kids who go to Sunday school, most of the time that would be either Catholic or very Christian orientated for most people. For me, it was Buddhist, because that's what we were brought up as Theravadan Buddhist. And then I kept wondering, where is this going? Then having the supernatural, having these various elements. I then started, because my mum stayed in India for 9 years when she was a child. Again, this is actually what happens when you are born to like either immigrant children or not. How do you keep that culture? So that was away in the 70s and 80s. My mum moved away. So there was that pride. So my mum always kept that with us. And then I got very interested, and I was like, okay, I'm getting introduced to Hindu deities. I was always interested in Egyptian deities and things like that. So when I found Wicca and paganism as a teenager, parts of me was like, oh, this is like a Western Hinduism. Partly, I didn't think it, but as a child, it was like, these people are goddesses, they've got God, they believe in magic. And then that's when me and my mum went onto that realm. We were exploring, and it was when I got into trouble in school quite a lot in that manner. I used to always ask my mum and dad, I was like, especially my mum, I was like, why are you allowing me to practice this? Because teachers are complaining. I had no issue, because as a child, my great aunts on my dad's side would come over, they would always ask me questions. Who knew that that would be the start of mediumship? I've got a little secret a lot of people don't really know, that I always wanted to do magic as a kid. Instead, rather than the magic that Alistair Crowley then put a K with, I started doing readings. You know, like, do you see? So I was already intuitive in that way. So I do not have the capabilities of sleight of hand. So
Can I
that's the
ask a
worst part.
question around that, Avi?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Because something's occurring to me, and I'm curious about that. So you've just described you came from a very multi-traditional home. So your background is very kind of all over from various parts of South Asia, right? Theravada Buddhism, Sikhism, and Christianity, right? So you were attending a Theravada Sunday school, which one of the large like multicultural Theravada temples in Glasgow, was this?
Yeah, so the Buddhist monk that came over would have been roughly about in the early 2000s.
Okay.
So this is where it all tied in, because even as a child, I used to go to Hindu temple. I went to church, obviously, because, you know, like Easter services, Christmas services, you'd go with the school. My parents were very involved with that. Because this is where it gets funny. My brother actually ended up going to the BB. I don't know if you know what that is, Boys Brigade in the UK. It was quite a big
Boys
thing.
Brigade, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got a little story I'll interject later about that one. It's quite funny. But going back to the school thing where I was getting into, I had this very heart-to-heart conversation, because as much as I'm an ethnic minority here, my belief systems were not seen like that, because I was coming from an open household where you would speak to adults who would come to you, they would be seeking, you know, if you're going to the temple. As you see, I've got an interest deeply with not just Western astrology, I went further into Jyotish. So you can see that there's all this concept that, I don't want to call it the supernatural, it was overlaid in life. You know, like the way we eat, the way we dress, the way we connect to nature, even divinity was everything. So then I said to my mom, and I was like, I'm getting into trouble constantly. People don't like this. When I'm telling them something, I thought it was normal, because, and she's like, no. Do you remember Burima? Burima means great grandmother or great grandmother, or oldest mother, obviously, Burima. And she said, when you were 7, it's quite funny, we've got pictures of this. She came over, and she was basically saying, because my uncle had mixed marriages, funny enough, she was more inclined to me and my brother. And because she was more of a traditionalist or a purist in that manner, she was like, they speak the language, they don't know. And she said, he's got something. She used to always tell my mum, and she says, when he gets older, do not stop him. And that's why I was like, all right, okay. And it was because of that. My mum was always, because my mum was the oldest grandchild as well. I'm the oldest great grandchild. So it was like, and it's not like we're using this granny excuse that, yes, the grannies teach us. If we look at it from that point of view, as an immigrant or those who've moved away, that elder would have seen something in that child or individual, even including myself, and said, no, he's taking an interest. Compared to like most kids that would have just either wanted, don't get me wrong, I was of the Pokemon generation, Digimon and all that, watching Nickelodeon and Fox Kids and things in the 90s. But there's always something pulling me to look into something else, because my birthday's in November. I'm just a week right after Samhain. So you can see how the cultural overlays are already happening, because that's the whole point. She would have already seen that I'm talking about things, talking about spirits and that, or giving advice, or just having dreams. And Dad's side was very, very inclined to like gurus and things like that. So I was always like around mystics and gurus and teachers. So there it started developing, and then I found Western paganism. And
well, so this
it.
is what I want to know. This is what I'm curious about, because before, like, coming from such a, like I said, a multi-traditional household, many, many moving parts there, many traditions all overlapping there. I'm curious about that connection then to kind of Western paganism. Like, what was the draw? In my experience of a lot of South Asian households here in Canada, you know, even individuals who are in paganism and Wicca, it's either, you know, very strongly connected to those cultural roots from South Asia or from Africa, or not. And then that not is where the introduction of paganism and looking at Western kind of Wicca comes in. So I'm curious for you, kind of what even created the opportunity for you to see, you know, there's this paganism thing, and what was the draw to that if you were already coming from such a multi-traditional household?
As I've just touched, as a 90s kid, for example, I was already watching Are You Afraid of the Dark, Goosebumps, Eerie, Indiana, all these weird things that were already on TV. And then don't forget,
Eerie, Indiana, wow.
Yes, it's so weird. I can go all the 90s if I need to. Then you got Sabrina the Teenage Witch. So you're not getting this. So I'm already immersed in this media. Then Harry Potter, I can't deny it. Do you think like this was already in the spectrum? The media was already showing us all this. So where there was a positivity of magic, it always kept that there. So as again, love Halloween, I can't deny it. You would think of the way I decorate sometimes, you'd think I should be moving to America instead. You know, like there was this kind of appeal. So for me, the overlap that started happening was the cross-fertilization that I saw. Because when I went into this pagan community, it was beautiful people. I'm not making it all pretty. I'm not saying it like that. I'm saying from a child point of view, when I was going into it as a teenager, me and my mum would go to all these shops. Hence, when we spoke about earlier about witch fox, I just love that. It was quite funny to reflect on that. And I thought, if I'm in the scene today, what is it really? So again, I think it sounds like a cliche. It's like that thing where it's like we were at the right place at the right time.
I see.
And because of that, I feel like it gave me the encouragement, because again, I started in 2001, 2002. I'm not going to deny it, because I'm born in 90. So being at 11, 12, you then start getting this idea of 2012's coming. You were getting all these spiritual centers. You were getting shamanism. You remember, like, you might have seen it as well on your side of the water as well, or if you've came back and forth to the UK. There was this big hype of there's something happening, something's coming. I'm not saying I was into the doomsday thing. I just found it really fascinating that everybody was like wanting to get involved, because before tarot was like taboo, you wouldn't talk about it. It was like the Ouija board thing. But there was this kind of, no, it's getting comfortable, we can talk about it. So then I was able to navigate not just my culture, but my spirituality. And then can't deny it, at the same time that puberty hits, you start to see sexuality comes into this as well. So there was all these like paths crossing. So when someone asks me how or why, it's a bit more deeper than that, because it opened up something that it was like you can be yourself, and that's very rare. I know all the other major belief systems may explain that, but there was not that individuality and totality of going, this is you. And then it took me right back to my maternal grandfather, who actually said, you can practice all this, you can do all this as long as you study. You know, it was that kind of South Asian, kind of Asian mentality of do whatever you want, as long as you're successful and you're studying and you pass your grades. So you can see why, as an emotional person and very intuitive person, that conversation took me back to when I was younger, and I spoke to my mom and I was like, why are you allowing this? And she was like, it's who you are. So you can see when someone's taking an interest in something, I think that's why, as I explained in my introduction, how blessed I am, because again, I'm fortunate, even coming out, my parents accepted it because, and I know that's a privilege. I'm not sitting here going, oh, la, 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 and people should all be like this. No, I have seen this, how difficult it is. And that's the whole point. Like the way you said, I'm creating a storm on the internet. It's when you become, as Jyot actually means, like Jyotish means light. And the only thing that a lot of people in any of these circumstances are seeking, in my experience, is they're looking for connection. They're looking for authenticity and someone that actually can acknowledge them. And I'm not saying you must acknowledge everyone. That's not possible. But when you take a deep interest in something, I noticed that we started to see like-minded people. We started, and it just opened up a whole path. So yes, I left. I don't want to say I left the other belief systems, but it did feel like when you go to temple, or if you go to all these other places, for example, it did feel like that kind of church mentality. There's a denomination, there's a congregation. You get that in all religions, but that's where the element of going to New Age shops going, and then we might not be the religion of a book. We became the belief system of every book. So again, if you're curious, it opened up doors to culture, other people, and it snowballed from there. That's what it was like. It was like, if you're going to ask a question, and I think that's why the Theravada Buddhism, personally, if I had to use that as a foundation, helped me, because what we used to do, love and kindness, Vipassana, you can see, just, making sure you just meditate, but with an awareness. So there was no, I was never brought up with the concept of heaven and hell. There was no hell, damnation, and there was no salvation. So all these concepts as a child and growing up was very unusual. It was foreign to me. So that's why, again, if you're wondering how did one come into that kind of pagan or even Wiccan kind of book or community, is because it reflected a lot of that. And how many people in our community, if I can use the word community for now, believe in reincarnation, karma. So I was seeing these, and then by the time I was like 14, 15, my mum by mistake got me the Theosophical Society books. So I got the Secret Doctrine. So mum thought by mistake they were Buddhist books, because I used to study religion quite early on, because religion was not foreign again, and it wasn't difficult. So whereas most people would be going into Eastern religions from a Western point of view, I was going the other way. So the Theosophical Society appeared, their books Isis Unveiled and the Secret Doctrine. So I started reading them about 15, 16, had no clue what they were.
Right.
Not most people could, but in the misconception I was given. So do you see the esoteric and the occult started appearing? So you see, that's another thing. So not just going to New Age shops, exploring. Literature was becoming quite interesting. I was like, oh. And then you could see, just by using Theosophy, for example, my cultural lens was actually looking at it from another point of view. I was like, wait, Blavatsky is based in India after she went with Henry Steele Olcott. They went in America, and then they actually, moved away. And that's what actually then I started going. And then with Aleister Crowley as well, as you can imagine, it was Libraba, the book 4, magic itself. The first part of that book, if you've looked at it, it's just basically Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It's got yams, niyams, as you can imagine, and then it's got the asana, then it's got pranayama, pratyahara. You see, it's got all of that, and then samadhi is the last step. Those are the Ashtanga, or 8 limbs of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So a lot of things did not feel foreign at all. I just thought, what are these people doing? You know, that way where you're like, this is just basically Hinduism disguised, or this is just, and then I could,
sorry, go on.
It was like, it was like that. And I just thought, me living in the UK, there was no concept, because I'm not born in India. So again, I was coming from that concept of, this is just every multicultural me. I'm Scottish Indian, if you can see it like that, if one does want to see it that way. It's fascinating, because I just seen all these books as, these are all reflecting this multitude of diversity. So again, you can see the diversity reflected something internally. And I was like, this is natural.
Absolutely.
It was not like you must not, or you cannot, or thou shalt not. None of that existed in anything I explored. So hence, if you only see
the books behind you, absolutely.
This is not a wallpaper. This is also real, and this is only half. This is half because I've got more around me, and then there's some in the other rooms. So you can
Absolutely.
see. Mm.
Well, well, I'm glad that you raised the piece around theosophy, because I mean, theosophy has had a lot of um, what's the word? How can I say it nicely? Has had a lot of complicated views against it over the past few years, mainly because the understanding of how distorted theosophy
Mm.
took, a lot of Hindu sources, a lot of specifically Buddhist sources after they fell out with Hinduism, and
Mm.
refocused.
Yeah, you
And
see
the
that with
sense,
AP Senate, AP
well, yes,
Senate role,
exactly.
esoteric Buddhism.
Yes.
You see
Hmm.
that with Annie Besant, and you also see that with Charles W. Ledbetter as well. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so you do see that. So I understand
Hmm.
the concept of it.
Hmm.
But again, as you can see, for me, I'm looking at it from a cultural lens.
Yes.
These were
Mhm.
upper middle class
Mhm.
Victorian
Mhm.
um, white people. And what they did do, I'm not going to say it's a disservice to my culture. What I would say they done was, I think it's difficult to see it from just one aspect. When we go through it from maybe an occult or an esoteric point of view, yes, it's complicated. But if you look at what they've done, and you can see that with any system, I find it really, really easy that you can just dismiss it, because if something's complicated, we don't see how much hard work and dedication goes into it. Like the way you've written a book, you
Mhm.
know how much
True.
goes into it. No
Absolutely.
matter how difficult or how simple the subject
Mhm.
matter is, there is still an aspect of what that is. So when you look at like Blavatsky, for example,
Mhm.
she did go to India, and then you had the columns, I believe, or columns. They actually said she was a fraud, and then the SSPR actually then had to pardon her and things. That's fine, but we have to look at it from what time, era, and
Mhm.
period that's from.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm.
we have moved on. We are having these cross-cultural like conversations, but these people back then were still trying to pioneer. Yes, if I was in India, yes, I would only be talking in Hindi. I might be actually speaking with my own cultural minority, then
Mhm.
became a majority.
Mhm.
But it's fascinating that I'm not justifying what these people must have done or what they haven't. I can only talk from how it impacted me.
That's what I'm
You get what I
curious
mean?
about.
I
Yeah.
find that, because
Mhm.
when we go down the route of this is bad, I think we also have to see that any text can be pulled out of
Mhm.
context realistically, the way
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
interpreted. So we can't put just one system. I
Mhm.
think it's very fascinating. If people start talking about root races, fine, I get it.
Mhm.
They may actually start going into these more darker subjects, right wing to alt wing.
Right.
I've heard of it all. I'm usually the only brown face in some of these pagan groups and these esoteric and occult groups, and I don't know how many times people pronounce chakra wrong,
Mhm.
yoga wrong.
Mhm.
Do you see what I mean? But
Mhm.
am I going to be there as some sort of Sanskrit grammatical police? Yes,
Mhm.
maybe, I don't know. But I also have to see not just intention, what is it that they're teaching? Because
Mhm.
if you think about it, I cannot police people,
Mhm.
because I myself will not do that. Because if I'm going
Right.
into other religions and cultures and that, would I not just also be hypocritical about that?
Mhm.
So I have to also see it from that lens, because, as you know, my background's social science. So I like to delineate, let's
Mhm.
see, is this theory actually where they were taking it? What's the
Mhm.
hypothesis? So we start using these languages. So
Mhm.
I will also research, but I also have to figure out, how did that impact me? What
Well,
do I
so
want to
if I can jump in, that's what
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
curious about. So, as somebody, I just laying this out there, I've studied theosophy for 20 years, right?
mm,
Especially the colonial connection and that colonial lens of how theosophy came into South Asia and some of the mucky things that it ended up doing. So I'm
now
very curious.
I
I
would have to
just want to
stop.
finish my question, if I
Oh,
may.
yes, fine. Mm,
So I'm curious with you then, what is that relationship between kind of like where you started with theosophy and then when you started to really reconnect with studying Ayurveda and
yeah, so
re-studying all those pieces.
this is where I find it fascinating.
Mm,
So why I wanted to just say stop on colonialism is because it's fascinating. It's a subject that I find interesting. If you look at theosophy, what it was doing, and
mm,
this is where it gets quite difficult.
mm-hmm,
I would like to ask people, who is it that's actually asking about colonialism? Like, who is asking about that? If I'm to be sitting in a room
mm-hmm,
and it's 98% white people saying
mm-hmm,
that,
mm-hmm,
I would like to ask them, what do you mean by that?
mm,
Because a lot of people don't actually realize when they touch on these subjects, it's like, what do you mean by that? Because it's like you cannot go into savior mentality. They have to be very careful of that. Because as academia, they seem to want to do that. And I'm like, because personally, I'm not going to say I'm an academic. I'm not. I'm like my culture, someone that has lived. So if someone from a university, because you might have heard of like Mama Lola, the book is very famous. She's not technically saying that she's actually the head of this. It was actually someone from university, Catherine, I think her name is, and then she went out, interviewed her. She then started. So I find it really fascinating. Like, we need to be careful of who are we actually asking that question to, because that's why, as you said, because I'm going to go into that in a second. Because for me, theosophy, when you look at it, they obviously influenced Germanic stuff, which gets quite, and then you could just start going into all that. But they were actually looking at India actually as some sort of mother, spiritual house, like home. So they used Aryan, not Aryan. And I found that very interesting, because when you start looking at it, they were looking at trying to get the British out from India, and they were actually against actually people that were Christian and how they were about to colonize and then actually convert people. So from my point of view, I found it really fascinating that they were actually going there to check what was there, but they were not actually changing the belief systems. So like most people that go to a country, usually we get drawn there because something's calling us. So if you had to look at it that way, it felt like as if Blavatsky in the 1800s was still human. She's not like some sort of divine figure. I don't see these people as divine figures. I found it really fascinating that she was literally going out there because she was drawn, she was called, like all us spiritual people. There is not coincidences, you know, there's that spontaneity that she would have been like pulled, and that's where it made me think as well. So in the pandemic, because in 2019, this is where it came for me. I used to go back and forth to America. If anybody wants to know what I was doing there, it was love interest. That's what actually caused that. And I actually was actually touched by what I saw in America, and it influenced me because of healthcare there, what I was seeing. And I started thinking, oh my God, what is going on? And I'm not going to deny, you know this yourself, which is certain subjects I don't really divulge in, but I loved going to botanicas. I used to see these as spiritual chemists. And what I found really, really beautiful was the way these were run in Trump era. People were coming together. If it was Latinos, they were not just going there for the candles, the bath. They were going there because there was someone that I knew. She was like a madrina, not to me, but to these people in the shop. And she became, as I say, as an ethnic minority, she was like looking after people who needed immigration because they couldn't speak English. If they needed herbs, if they needed that. So then I took that concept as well, and that's how paganism actually helped me in that way. And then when I came back, when I say home, to Scotland, I started thinking, I have indigenous wisdom. I can use this idea from India. I was like, this is actually my own. And I was like, what am I actually doing? I'm jumping around all over the planet, which I love. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's sensible. And that's where, just even touching theosophy, for example, it made me go, are we not also evolving as people? So yes, it's fine to go, because this is the fine line that I've seen when it comes to culture and identity and race. We need to be careful that we don't become very staunch to the point where it becomes quite alt, to the point where we start to just believe we are just this one thing. Because that's why I'm looking forward to your work that's going to be coming out. Just like the ancestors, I cannot say that I am purely Indian just because of the phenotype and the genotypes, the way they play, because something inside may actually blow me away and I might actually have somebody else in me. It's possible. You know, like, it's very possible. So I cannot just go by the outer layer. So when I see colonialism, I actually have to see it as consumerism. Big difference. Because what has already been done cannot be undone. So I can only take what is from that. And as a modern practitioner, I also have to see, because I don't use sage. I'm like that. Why would I use sage if I can use rosemary? I'm just using that as an example. And that's where we touched on, as you were saying about Obod. It called me just recently. Why? Because I felt like I was detached from this land. Not that I'm saying that I don't know Glasgow, I don't know Edinburgh, I don't know
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Scotland or the UK. You know me. I'm not always going back and forth all over this country like crazy. And it made me think, I've had these conversations with people that are, you can outright call them racist and things like that, and they say, oh, you're not off this land, shouldn't be practicing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, fine. But how does nature actually differentiate that? And that's where Ayurveda comes into it. That's where consumerism comes into it. And that's where I make sure that if you are doing something, because Ayurveda for me then opened up what I already knew in the occult science, the esoteric sense, and the mind, body, spirit that you might see on these conventions and fairs. This took it to a whole deeper level. How do we eat? What foods are affected by us? What are the 5 elements? What element is more deeper, like Pitta, if it's fire and water, if it's Kapha, water and earth? So how are we impacting that inside us? So do you see? So then it took my practices on a more embodied level.
Right. Yes.
I began to embody my practice, not just because then again with the sexuality, we can't say this is separate. My gods are separate. I am a Shakta. So what does that mean? I am actually embodying my practices. We see Devi or Shakti, not power, but energy is everywhere. So if it's everywhere, that should also mean it's internalized. So I'm also using that. So when I'm exploring these concepts, that's how when people talk about colonialism, I also have to be an adherent to it as well and say, am I also
Colonial.
enabling it? So I need to be very careful. So because the thing is, like how we are, right? I will see you as my friend, but we cannot skirt around it and start going, you can't do this, Ben. I can't do this. I can't do that. We have to also be very mindful of, yes, Mother Nature's giving us this. Bhudevi, Mother Nature, Earth is giving us this. But does it give us the right to just go, no. Because right now we are on a very critical point. So I think we have to be very careful. Yes, we have to respect knowledge. We have to respect culture, and we also have to respect who is it that is practicing these things. Because I have seen a lot of teachers that are at the top, and they're taking it from different lenses. Do you see where that's going?
Absolutely.
But as individuals, we also have our responsibility, and that's where Swadharma and Paradharma comes into. Swadharma, which, as you can imagine, means your personal responsibility. And if I know what I'm doing and it's not affecting you, I am doing my Swadharma, mine. That's it.
Yes.
But if I'm encroaching in yours and you're not telling me, it's going to be a point where you're going to tolerate it so much that you're going to be like, no, sorry, back off. That's my Paradharma's actually being breached. So I should not do that. So if I do that, then I believe then, have I also made a mistake then? Do you see where that's gone? So when I do see colonialism, I'm trying to figure out, how do I navigate that in this day and age?
I see. Okay.
With my ancestors, because again, I have fessed up, and I keep telling people this. I am privileged because my practices changed with paganism in 2011 and 2013, because I used to go back and forward to India every 2 years, and I'm not going to deny it. I saw poverty in children there. 2, 3-year-old begging on the street. Here's me going to Mumbai, Delhi, buying all these amazing books, because for me it was cheap. I have the pound and I was going there to get the rupee. You can imagine what's going on. You're getting all these amazing esoteric Sanskrit books and things like that. And no, I got a reality check. It was like I saw 2, 3-year-olds, not because they were in gangs, actual children sleeping on the ground. And the one thing that shocked me was there was a temple, and this priest just had samosas, like we Indians, pastries, as you can imagine, and he just threw them. And the children were just so ravenous at it, and I just thought,
absolutely, yeah.
What am I doing? So when I started practicing and I came back to the UK and I came back and I used to do a lot of conventions and talks, that empowered me, and I had to ask the witch community, what are we? Who are we doing it for? Why? And I wrote an article in Pagan Dawn in 2010, and it was called Magic in the Recession. So you see, Ayurveda for me was returning to my roots. It's talking about that medicine that you can practice is actually in our cupboards. You've seen it with hedge witchery, green witchcraft, and those that are kitchen witches and things like that. Even druids and people that practice, it's innate wisdom.
Yes.
So colonialism, I'm making sure when people discuss that, you also have to figure out, are they Starbucks yoga chai latte folk that are like, namaste?
Right.
I'm like, fine. Do you get what I mean? I've seen thousands of them. I'm not even saying hundreds. I've seen thousands. if you're going to do that, I'm going to ask you a question. Why? Why do you feel you need to say namaste to me if you see that I'm like this? That's my personal preference.
That's the
Just
thing,
say
right?
hello to me.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if people are going, it means I bow down to your innate spirit and I acknowledge you.
Mm.
Yeah, just say hello.
Yeah.
Be normal. I have
Yeah.
seen it, and I have seen it in all these esoteric circles and things like that. And I am quite, that's why Ayurveda and Jyotish for me became very grounded,
Mm.
because it's like, don't use our spirituality as escapism.
Mm.
Don't use it as a fantasy or a getaway.
Mm.
Please acknowledge if you've got trauma, if you need to speak to people, like that's why there is a community, but also you also have to acknowledge that it's not also a community, it's also
Mm-hmm.
a group of individuals. There's a
Mm-hmm.
big difference. So
Mm.
that's why it also helped me to go into these practices of how do I embody my practice? And that's what I do. And that's why I've got my clinic. That's why I do my readings. So that's why
Absolutely.
you might see me coming out more out in that
Mm.
manner, because at first it was like, yes, I don't know how many of us have read hundreds
Right.
of books. All of us have read Llewellyn books,
Mm-hmm.
when we start. So we love it. Do you get what I mean? We read
Mm-hmm.
all these different esoteric books, all these different things, but we also have to go the other way
Mm.
and start living our practice. And I
Mm-hmm.
did that. And I can only speak for myself.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that other people aren't living it. That's not for me to
Absolutely.
say.
Absolutely.
And that's what I want to do. And when I'm
Mm.
sharing it, I just want people to just know that you don't need all that stuff, or you don't need to. The biggest gift that we
Mm-hmm.
have is our breath. And what does Hinduism and Buddhism
Mm-hmm.
and many of our magical practices talk about? Breathing, coming
Mm-hmm.
back to the present. There is no need to be anything but yourself, and that's it.
Yes.
And I think
Absolutely.
that's the most powerful message that I've been getting
Yes.
after especially after the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is where I changed, because I was practicing within the pandemic. I actually did practice Shri Vidya Tantra very deeply with my Guruji. But something inside me, because my Guruji, I love them.
Mm-hmm.
But what actually happened was they were like wanting to me to just focus, because when someone meets me, the one thing is, it's just like that introduction that you might have seen, or when we were, or those who are listening, it was fascinating. When something's so vast, we don't understand it.
Mm.
And I realized something about us, if you wanted to call us LGBTIQ plus or beyond,
Mm.
because we are so vast.
Mm.
I've noticed something amongst all of us as individuals is we need to accept that we're multifaceted.
Mm-hmm.
Because I went through a strange spiritual crisis, because I
Mm-hmm.
then, for like, first of all, in the pandemic, when it started March 2020 in the UK, because it changed in certain places around the globe, it wasn't all. So I can't just be like, the UK March 2020, we're all superior, every other country, blah, blah. No. So I can only talk about what I saw here. In March 20, I had this major breakup, obviously in 2019. And it was like a weird blessing in disguise. My social media all got hacked. I still want to say, whoever my hacker was from Indonesia, I love you.
Right.
Because
If they're watching this.
if they are, I just want to say thanks, because I don't think you realized that you helped me. I just got rid of all my social media, and then in March 2020, I went deeper into Ayurveda.
Mm.
And in August of September, August of 2020, I was off for 6 months. And I then, when I was supposed to come on the Ayurvedic school that I was a part of originally, they wanted a Facebook group. And I started thinking, okay, I'm just going to add only Hindus and Buddhists and Jyotish. And I was not acknowledging any of my paganism, witchcraft, or anything, even though in the background I was practicing. Publicly, I was like, no.
Mm.
And I
Why
went
was
through
that? Why was that,
nearly
Avi?
2 years with that. It was something that, first of all, my Guruji was actually, because when you're with a guru, it's not that they control anything. It's not like
Mm.
brainwashing you.
Mm-hmm.
They want the best for you. And my room that you see now did not look like this. It looked like as if it looked like something out of a movie. And the walls were different. We had to change it, and they brought clarity of mind. Because you have to remember, our external environment reflects our internal space. So they thought, oh, and they were like, no, 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 no. It was like going, no, kid, you need to sit down, you need to focus. And I see that. So the vastness that I had was vast. And then they gave me structure. And in those 2 years, I just studied Ayurveda, and I was studying Tantra, I was studying Jyotish. I was going like really
Right.
hardcore into this. And it was only just recently that when I established last year the clinic, and then my readings and my group came back. I run a group called Semper Viva in Glasgow, and I noticed in those 2 years I was very unhappy.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And when you're multifaceted,
Mm.
it was as if when I was told you can't practice this, you can't do this, and I thought I'm going to give it a try,
Mm.
and I'm devoted to what I do. But you know that way where it was like if you are more than one thing, or if you're
Mm-hmm.
bilingual, and
Mm-hmm.
someone just says you speak one language, it was like the mind couldn't comprehend, and then my spirit was like yearning. And then when I came back, just this year, everything now is it's like very much we're all coming out of this historical period that we're all having. Spiritually, now I'm a lot more happier, a lot more settled, because I'm now acknowledging also my roots,
Mm.
not just the Hindu side, also who I am, where have I come from?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty of why paganism actually spoke to me, because you might have heard they always call it the umbrella term and things like that in a lot of different circles.
Mm-hmm.
Some places call it the salad bar religion. I think maybe that's what I am.
A salad bar?
Is yes,
Yeah.
and diversity. It was like
Right.
nothing was ever forced on me.
Mm.
And I think that's what we have to remember is
Mm.
the only person that stops you is yourself.
Mm.
And that's what I went through in those 2 years.
Mm.
So I'm not saying that that hindered me. It was interesting to go the
Mm.
other way, to just
Mm-hmm.
focus. And it was beautiful to come back and
Absolutely.
reemerge
Absolutely.
and acknowledge how far one comes. But in
Mm.
these practices, what I found really, really powerful was also the reflection of not just how far I've come, but how to re-envision it as well. Because
Right.
when you
Right.
leave something for so long and then you come back to it, you actually do see growth, but you also see
Mm-hmm.
potential for what's not been there. And I think that's why all these different paths allow us to remember that no, we're not exploiting or taking them for the sake of it. If
Mm.
someone is doing that, then we could say to them, no, can you just stop? And you can tell by the way they're practicing or the
Mm.
way they're speaking.
Mm.
But when someone lives it, there's a beauty of something's interwoven.
Well,
And I
that's
think,
sorry, go on.
no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's shown in this day and age.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Absolutely. Well, so I'm going to press you a little bit harder here. Maybe a little
Yes,
therapy
please do.
session here. So what what I heard you just say, you said, you were forced to focus by your Guruji. You were forced to focus on Ayurveda and Tantra, and then you really focused on that, but you had that yearning, and you called yourself salad bar, kind of looking at that, like you're looking at
Mm-hmm.
multiple paths, right? So you're seeing all these similarities between all these paths.
Yes.
What did you notice about yourself?
In that period when I was, see, it sounds like I'm saying forced. They were only looking for my
Mhm.
best interest. They were. There was
Mhm.
never like they got
Mhm.
like the Asian style slipper or they got a stick or they were like going to
Mhm.
smack me. No,
Yes, yes.
nothing like that. I think when you start a relationship and you find your
Mhm.
guru,
Mhm.
I think what it is, there's still a human element.
Mm.
And I think what they were doing was this kind of psychoanalysis. Tantra is
Mhm.
very mind, it's very
Absolutely,
deep.
it is. Yes, it
So I
is.
think what they were trying to do was they were trying to figure out me, and they were trying
Mm.
to think, is this person deep as
Right,
the ocean,
right.
or is this person airy fairy and they're just like this huge tornado that's just flying around and just
Mm.
like la 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 la. And I think that's what I like with my guru in that manner was
Mm.
they acknowledged me as their child,
Mhm.
but they also acknowledged me as an adult, and they're like, so they also made me think of,
Mhm.
is this amount of stuff necessary? Is this
Mm.
amount of reading actually getting you anywhere? What are you
That's a good
actually
question.
creating your foundation in? These
Mhm.
questions kept coming up. So yes, my parents nurtured and supported me, because you see how you got the mother, father, we say Mata Pitta Guru Deva, there's this
Mhm.
kind of thing that we say.
Mhm.
It's really beautiful. It's like saying mother gives birth, father is there.
Mhm.
And then these are your, and you can see that in sociology, you know, that I forgot what they call it, the not hypodermic, it's socialization. That
Mhm.
would have been media, family, religion, all that,
Mhm.
and socializing. So you can see you got the mother, father, guru, and deva. After guru,
Mhm.
it's God or the divine.
Mhm.
And they assessed all this and going, this is disciple or my student. How do I give them the best insight? So
Mm.
yes, I would say it came across as forced, but in the long run,
Mm.
just like as you can see, Karate Kid,
Mhm.
it was like Mr. Miyagi. I had my own
Yes,
Mr.
absolutely. Yes,
Miyagi.
yes, yes.
It was did not give me fabulous magical things to do.
Mhm.
No, they gave me mundane things to do. They checked am I suitable?
Mm-hmm.
Am I made for this?
Yes.
And I am very, very grateful that I have a teacher that did that to me, because
Mm.
yes, people who meet me, they go, oh, you're so knowledgeable, you're doing this. But again, we're on our journeys, and
Mm.
that's what the guru does, or the teacher does, was going, no, 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 no. End
Mm-hmm.
of the day,
Mm.
yes, you have arrogance, you have an ego, but you need to learn this.
Mm.
And why are we practicing what we're practicing? And why do we have all these books? And why do we have all these things that we like? Because we like it.
Mm.
If someone gave me an exam to do
Mm-hmm.
on some of this stuff, and we all dreamed that we would like to go to Hogwarts or a place like that. But if we actually had to do exams on potions, divination, tarot cards, like actual curriculum on it, I don't think as many of us would actually enjoy it like the way we're enjoying it as we're living it.
Mm.
So that's what I love about what my Guruji partied with me as a
Absolutely.
gift. They said, focus. And I now see the big difference, because
Right.
before I was like, I'm into this, I'm into that, I'm into, where does that lead us? Nowhere.
Well, that's what I'm curious. I really relate to that piece because, through periods of my own life, it's, Ben the pagan, Ben the Hindu, Ben the this,
Yeah.
Ben the, all this, right? And it sounds a similar process for you, Avi the Shakta, Avi the Jyotisha, Avi the pagan, Avi the this, Avi the that. So who is,
It gets to the point. It gets to that point of
yeah.
who are we, and then
Well,
look
who
at
is
that.
Avi? That's my
Do you see?
question, you know.
Mm,
Same with who is Ben, right?
mm.
You know.
And then
Yeah.
that's where it goes back to that know thyself. All
Yeah.
these esoteric subjects, spirituality, should make us see that in the end, there is no separation. That's what Hinduism mostly teaches, that
Mm-hmm.
this is technically a Maya, it's an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
The ahankara, which is the ego, not like ego, ego, superego, not that one. The actual
Mm-hmm.
being that we've created, like
Mm-hmm.
this identity. We ask that question like the way we have asked. That is the universal idea of why we're on this deep journey of the soul or the self.
Mm-hmm.
Who are we? And in that, that's what my Guruji taught me. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I cannot give the answer, because I know people go, oh, it doesn't have the answer. I do, because that's where the wisdom gets parted. This vidya. That's the beautiful thing. And I think, like any secret initiation, like any of them, yes, there's oath bound. I get it, but I realized why beyond the oath bound, if that experience that's been parted has been parted to Avi, not Ben. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand this, because if I explain it,
Mm-hmm.
it might be a fabulous story,
Mm-hmm.
but will that have the same impact mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, like it did on me at that period, at that time, in that way, that it may happen to you if I just tell you verbally? No.
No.
And I understand that we have secrets. I understand we have to adhere and we respect that. But there's also that other element of, if it's not meant to be, or that person's not meant to experience it, they won't understand it. Because it's like the way I was at the age of 14, when I was handed the secret doctrine, had no clue what it was. I'd rather have read what some of the Wiccan books. I'm not saying that they were any lesser. I'm just saying my heart was in it, because that's what I understood at that time.
Right.
It's only when we go back to certain books, you might have noticed it in your own experience. There's some books that we just touched earlier on, like,
Oh,
I have
totally.
no clue
Yeah.
what it's in. And then when we look back now, we go, okay, so now that's how I feel in my practices. It's like it's like not a spiral, but it's like this way. It's going
Absolutely,
up
it
the
is.
way, but
Yeah.
it's touching also the same points, but in a further, deeper part, and it's changed. And I'm very
Absolutely.
honored, and I'm honored to share this. So thank you for
Oh yeah,
allowing
absolutely. I'm glad
me.
that you came onto the show to talk. We are coming up to time, but
Yes.
we've got a few more minutes left. But that piece right there, I think that for me at least, what's really been underscored in my own life journey is, you know, I can gain understanding and insight, but it's not going to be the same insight somebody else is going
No.
to gain, right? I can say whatever my journey is and the insights I've gained, and it won't be applicable to somebody else, right? It's like Julian Vane, who do you know Julian Vane?
Yeah, I've seen him
Julian,
many times in
yeah.
the occult conferences. Yes.
So Julian said that in one of my favorite podcasts. He said, he gave the example of going up the mountain. Somebody goes up the mountain, brings back, this is the truth. And he says, well, that might be your truth, but that's not my truth, because I have to climb up the mountain too, right? We all have to climb up the mountain and come back.
We all have to.
And I mean, at least for me in my own life, part of that mountain has been books. It seems like yours as well. But
I would say the other part of the beauty of climbing that mountain is when people stop, they get tired.
mhm.
And I never get tired because you can imagine I'm always running around doing stuff and
Never
that.
get tired.
I never get tired, no. I say I'm spiritual coffee. Trust me, when you meet me in person, you'll feel it. Um, I love the people that I bump into or on the same path or as they move forward. It's the people that make it beautiful. I cannot uh, extend the gratitude to every individual that I've met that has made me me.
Mhm,
Because even if I reflect who is Avi, I can't actually even question that or even give you a definitive answer because
mhm,
we keep changing, but we're
mhm.
still the same essence. So
Absolutely.
it's the people like the authors, the practitioners, even the people that have passed, even those who are yet to come. I think it's just beautiful because I am a plethora and like a kitchery or a
Mhm,
dal, if you want to call it, a wee Indian soup, of many spices of my ancestors and
mhm,
people and different experiences. And as I say, what made me, I would say I was an individual that actually
mhm,
had to be here, like all of us.
mhm,
And my journey, hopefully, by doing this, just gives another person another insight and saying, yes, you are doing what you're meant to do and continue it because that's the message I was always given. Because the
mhm,
one thing I would say is, I've always, when I did this major ritual in Samhain 2012, I remember it. And I remember this at the age of 21, nearly like wondering what happened. Created this huge ritual for so many people, and so much happened. And it was like it just broke, and something spoke
mhm.
to me. And it was like saying to me, just stop. And do you know what I said? Who are you trying to please? And I will always go
Good
back to
question.
that.
Yeah.
I will always, whoever that being was,
Mhm,
I still thank them.
mhm,
And I will always reflect on that. No matter how much we try,
mhm.
look how far we've come. And it's always trying to say, who am I trying to please? End of
Yeah.
the day, I'm not saying I'm self-gratifying and all that. I'm not saying that. I'm just
Mhm,
saying, end of the day, we need to be careful that we don't keep going
mhm.
and
Yeah.
we don't acknowledge the self. So that's another beautiful aspect of what
Absolutely.
I've experienced
Yeah.
in my own mystery traditions or just
Yeah.
experience of tantra or paganism. It has a mystery element. So that's
Mm,
something that really I can't let go of. So that
absolutely.
maybe is what I'm exploring with this veil or me. I don't know. It's beautiful.
Well,
So again,
now I'm curious. Who were you trying to please in 2012? Who do you think who you were trying to please?
others.
Others. Anybody
Yeah.
specifically, or
Others. Let's
just
just
others?
I think it would have been others because when I look back nearly over a decade, I was young,
Yeah.
and like most of us, we see people in authority who would have been
Mm,
adults as people that we could either trust, or
absolutely.
we don't realize that yes, they're going through their own issues. They're not perfect. None of us are.
Mhm,
So then I think what that was trying to say to me is stop justifying yourself, stop looking for approval and acceptance. If you are an individual and you are
mm,
practicing, you will find who you are meant to be when you are meant to be. And that's where I
mm,
feel I am. It's like, I'm not saying that I'm still not looking for approval or acceptance. We're human. We
mhm,
still want to be liked. We still want to be amongst our friends. We still want
mhm.
to be family. I'm not saying that I'm detached and become a wee sannyasi, like a little monk.
Oh,
But
wait until
I
you're
think that's
45
where,
though.
oh, well, I think I'll be even more crazier. More books and more people to look forward to. But again,
Mm.
yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So I look forward to when you come on this side of the water,
Of
Ben, when it
course,
happens.
yes. Very much looking
Have
forward to
more
coming up and
chats.
seeing you.
So
Yeah. Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. Yeah. I have one last question because it's burning
Yes.
in my thought here. But you were talking before about kind of your journey into kind of reconnecting with Scotland and your local landscape, and as a
Mhm.
way of kind of reconnecting with those roots, because being born there, you have those roots too, right? And so I'm
Mhm.
curious then, how does your Ayurveda, as this kind of universal system, how does your Ayurveda kind of take roots in that local landscape? I'm thinking on the material
So
level, right?
again, I was talking about, we won't go too long on to like, because it's a vast subject, Ayurveda. So
Absolutely.
one thing I would say is Ayurveda is all about you living with the land, not you against the land.
Hmm.
So for example, we talk about, you might have heard of these herbs, ashwagandha,
Hmm.
shatavari,
Yep.
brahmi, bacopa monerius, brahmi, and that things like that. So you might have heard of these herbs. Now, it's a funny one because I was seeing this in the conjure and the hoodoo scene. I understand spiritually that herbs have their potent purpose. But when keeping it in your pocket or worshipping it, you have to know why. So I, as a practitioner, I work in Napier's. It's like one of the herbalists that's been established in Edinburgh, but there's a Glasgow branch, and I'm doing many other things for myself. Yeah, but it was like, if you look at the 5 elements, okay, you got Akash, which is spirit, Vata, which is Vayu, so that makes Vata, so it's air and spirit. Pitta is fire and water, as I said earlier, and Kapha is earth and water. So you'll see these kind of things in like congenital diseases. You may see these in any issues. So if it's, for example, fire and water, that's going to be blood. So you can see that's going to then affect liver, eyes, skin. So you see these are already there. Air, you can, because of the work that you do, you'll see that in the nervous system. So you see, so the human body, yes, it's intricate, but no matter where it is on the planet, I had to then acknowledge that. So when I was looking at it, for example, we have something called Judamancy. It's called Indian spiking arts, and that actually will relax you. So then I was like thinking, why would I need to get a foreign herb, right? That could be expensive. Exporting it.
Totally.
When I could actually just forage and look for valerian, skullcap, lavender. Do you see already? These are all vata pacifying herbs. So I am using the same philosophy. So if someone just say has hay fever, or if they've got itchy eyes, every human, I don't want to say it like this, every human physiologically should have 2 eyes. I'm not saying everybody does, because I need to be careful in that sense. If they've got hay fever, do you see? I'm not going to say that the nose is going to be up there, or their mouth is going to be there, or do you see? Realistic, unless it's an anomaly, I get it, but that's why I then went more into, and I found Obod fascinating, because it reconnected some of my older paganism as a teenager, and I thought, oh, this is interesting, because again, we can talk for ages. Even like Philip Carr-Gomm with his India connection and Jainism, I've noticed that. Do you see? It keeps going back to the earlier conversation before we started this conversation, how it keeps connecting me back to my roots, because everybody's connected to something, and you could say that, am I connecting the dots or that? So Ayurveda principles are of the earth. So it's like, I will take from my land here, and I will not import and export. It's possible. I'm not saying I don't do. I'm not some sort of purist, but that's how that works. And Scotland has so much to offer, and
beautiful landscape.
Yeah, and I think also me being part of it, you can see, as you said at the start, I'm making a little storm online. It's because if you don't, I don't think people are going to actually acknowledge what's on offer unless you speak. Because how can someone know if they don't know? So that's another beautiful side of Ayurveda for me anyway, is it's a vast subject, but we all have to start somewhere. And where do you start? Connecting to each other, connecting to the earth. And that's the most beautiful thing that it's taught me. So yeah, paganism, Ayurveda, whatever. End of the day, we still live on Bhudevi, Mother Nature, Gaia, whoever. She's still, or they are giving. And I think, in all honesty, as a practitioner of nature or the occult or whatever we want to call it, I think it's my birthright to make sure we give back to the one that's we're standing on and breathing. So that's what Ayurveda teaches us, is we are one. So thank you, Ben.
Absolutely. No, thank you. I think that's a good place to end, but I do want to make a comment here, a little reflection. What I love about what you just said, it's kind of that soft focus, moving back a little bit to see the connection points and focusing on those, as opposed to while also acknowledging the important differences too, right? Yeah, absolutely. This has been a wonderful chat, Avi. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. As I said, I didn't know what to expect, but when you have a good friend to talk to, you can talk for ages. But again, it's flowed, and I'm hoping whoever needs these messages and what you're doing, Ben, thank you, and continue, because it's work that's needed. So again, gratitude, and it just means a lot. So thank you, and
thank you.
I'm looking forward to continuing to watch what you develop. So I can't wait for the many more guests that you have coming up. So good luck and enjoy. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Avi. And as Avi was saying, I have many more guests coming up. And so in the next couple of weeks, we have Enfys J. Book, author of Queer Kabbalah, and a load of others. You can visit my Facebook page and my Instagram page, and see the upcoming guests for my summer series. Avi, before you go, how can people find you? Do you have social media? I know you said you deleted Facebook, but
No, I'm
where can
back.
people
I
find
promise
you?
I am back. They just find me just via your page, I believe. I just use my
Mhm.
name. It's just Avi Lago. So either Instagram or just feel free to just reach out if there's anything that's touched you today. If it's Ayurveda, if it's just spiritually, or you just want to speak. I just say to people, I'm here, and
Perfect.
whatever way you want to reach out, feel free. So thank you.
Wonderful. I will put all those links down below, and I will see you at the next talk. And Avi, we will see each other privately. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you. See you soon.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye.